get into, should we read into it that there will be exemptions for certain countries?
President Putin has confirmed what the United States government has known all along, which Russia has denied. Russia has been developing destabilizing weapons systems for over a decade in direct violations of its treaty obligations. President Trump understands the threats facing America and our allies in this century and is determined to protect our homeland and preserve peace through strength.
Do you confirm or deny that the president has made a decision to go
with punitive tariffs on steel and aluminum imports that would take effect next week? 10% for aluminum, 25% for steel. He announced them even though the fine details have not been worked out yet about what countries will be involved, whether there are any exemptions. The Dow's down about 500 points as a result of this. Some of our allies, including Canada, are saying that these actions are unacceptable. Why did the president announce them now, particularly before the details have even been worked out?
The president's announcing his intent to sign those actions next week. We're not going to get into any more details until those details are finalized, but that is what he intends to do next week, and he was making that announcement.
Protectionism is weak, not strong, and he concluded by writing...
The president will be speaking here in a couple minutes.
Analysts in the West have said this is the declaration of a new Cold War. Are we in a new arms race right now?
My point of view is the individuals who have said that a new Cold War has started are not really analysts. They do propaganda. If you were to speak about arms race, then an arms race began at exactly the time and moment when the U.S. opted out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty.
Some analysts are suggesting you've tested it and it's failed, and that's why you only showed animations of it today and have not yet produced any actual videos.
Are you talking about ICBMs?
Yes, the one that you claim renders defense systems useless.
As a matter of fact, every single weapon system discussed today easily surpasses and avoids an anti-missile defense system.
But you've tested it?
The test was excellent. Some of them still have to be fine-tuned and worked on. Others are already available to the troops and already are battle ready.
For the record, right now, do you have a workable ICBM that's powered by nukes that you've tested successfully?
All of those tests were successful. It's just each of these weapon systems is at a different stage of readiness. One of them is already on combat duty. It's with troops. For some of the systems, we're still working on them. We have no doubt that we will get there.
But again, you say that you're going to use these weapons, these nuclear-powered weapons, if Russia or its allies come under attack. Any attack or only a nuclear one?
We have two reasons that would force us to respond using our nuclear weapons. The first is a nuclear attack against us, or an attack against the Russian Federation using conventional weapons. But in this case, if it's a threat to the very existence of the Russian state.
Vladimir Putin's State of the Nation address has sent parts of the media into a frenzy, accusing Russia of Cold War-era posturing. During the speech, the president showcased the country's new strategic weapons, which he said could outsmart all existing missile defenses.
The White House and the country learning of that new threat from Russian President,
warning his adversaries, and in the West in particular, not to mess with Russia.
Computer graphics of missiles flying over mountains and heading over oceans.
And he says he's not bluffing.
Though many saw the address as a threat directed at the United States, Moscow claims it has no intention of using its military might. The high-tech weaponry is intended only to preserve the global balance of power, as Murad Gazdiev reports.
If you aren't Russian, the first hour of Putin's speech would have been boring. Taxes and corruption, science and industry, that sort of thing. After that, though, it got real hot, real fast.
Russia is a major nuclear power, but basically nobody wanted to talk to us. Nobody listened to us. So, listen to us now.
Rockets, lasers, nukes. In a rush, Putin unveiled an arsenal of new weapons, bigger, faster, stronger, and deadlier than any that came before. The Sarmat Super Heavy ICBM, a 200-ton missile capable of penetrating any existing defense, in service at the end of the year. Next, an enigmatic new development, a seemingly nuclear-powered cruise missile. It flies extremely low to avoid detection and can hit almost anywhere in the world, says Putin. Up next.
It's just fantastic.
An underwater drone submarine, also nuclear-powered with a nuclear payload. It can reportedly lurk underwater for months and months, silent and nearly undetectable. Next, the avant-garde, the hypersonic missile, extremely fast rocket that can actively dodge and evade anti-missile defenses.
It is heading for the target like a meteorite.
To top all of that off, laser weapon systems, though Putin didn't go into details, saying only that it's still classified. The Russian president says all of this isn't to intimidate or scare anyone or invade anyone. These are serious weapons designed for one thing: restore and guarantee Russia's strategic power in an age where an ever-expanding NATO is trying to nullify it.
We have no plans and have never had plans to use this potential to achieve offensive or aggressive ends. Russia's enhanced military power is simply a guarantee for peace on our planet, for it preserves.
Restore parity in the world, show that there's no point in engaging in a senseless arms race. After all, mutually assured destruction has kept the world safe for the best part of a century.
Chance joins us now from Moscow. And Matthew, obviously a lot of ground to cover, but let's begin with the alarming claims that Putin made during his State of the Nation address, that Russia has developed an invincible missile that can reach anywhere in the world. How seriously should we take this?
Well, I think very seriously. This was a speech that Vladimir Putin gave to both houses of the Russian Parliament. It comes just 3 weeks before the presidential election in this country, which he is expected to win. And he made what was one of his sort of toughest sort of anti-Western speeches that he's made in some time, basically warning his adversaries, and in the West in particular, not to mess with Russia. He spoke about the new strategic weapons the country has developed or are in development right now, including these, what he called invincible missiles that can strike anywhere on the planet with no limitations in range. He spoke about other missiles that are hypersonic, so super fast, and cannot be brought down by the US missile defense system. Other missiles which were very maneuverable and were equally able to avoid the deployment in Eastern Europe of the US missile defense system. Basically, the message from Vladimir Putin as he spoke to parliamentarians, and of course it was broadcast on national television as well, was very much that Russia as a military power is back. Take a listen.
No other country in the world has this kind of arsenal. Why did we do this? Why did we agree on it? There were absolutely no secrets about it. We said it absolutely publicly to all our colleagues. Despite all the problems that we encountered in terms of the economy and finance, industry and so on, Russia still has the greatest nuclear potential in the world, but nobody listened to us. Now listen.
Well, now listen to us. That was the final words of Vladimir Putin there in a not so veiled warning to Russia's adversaries. He also went on to criticize the new US nuclear doctrine, which he said lowers the bar for the use of nuclear weapons. He made the point that, you know, if any nuclear attack, even a small-scale nuclear attack, is carried out, obviously, against Russia or any of its allies, then that would be considered as a proper nuclear assault on the motherland, on Russia, and the response, he said, from Russia would be immediate.
To stress his point that the new weapons serve only to balance the world powers, Putin pointed out that US missile defense is already deployed in Alaska and in California. NATO's also expanding into Eastern Europe, with 2 sites having been set up in Romania and Poland. And new sites are soon to be established in Japan and South Korea. And apart from ground-based launch weapon systems, the U.S. complex also includes a naval component, meaning that right now, America has 5 Navy cruisers and 30 destroyer ships stationed right along Russia's eastern borders. Now, we spoke to several defense analysts who think the Russian president's speech was not intended as a threat.
It was defense, deterrence, competition and containment. No aggression, no thoughts of initiating a war, which is reassuring. The defense versus the offense in missile technology and anti-missile technology has probably reached a new phase with Putin's speech, and the Americans, even though they have known, at least in general terms, that these weapon systems are in the pipeline, will probably react with some surprise at the advanced stage in which they were unveiled.
These are not designed for warfighting. These are designed to send the very clear message that President Putin said quite clearly, which is that these systems are basically saying, if you mess with us, we will nuke you and we will not hold back. Now, that is a strategic statement. It's not a statement about escalating to de-escalating, which is what the Russians are often accused of and were accused of officially by the American government in the nuclear posture review, which is indeed a dangerous doctrine, but it's not a real doctrine that the Russians have ever endorsed.
So to unpack it all, the politics here in Washington are pretty much well defined. The Democrats, well, they say they want justice. Really what they want is this president to leave office. The Republicans can't get a big enough military budget, and the president of the United States needs to find a way to simmer relations with Russia without looking weak. It's a tall order. For more on that, we turn to Linda Gunter tonight. She is with the organization known as Beyond Nuclear. Linda, nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
How did you take the president's speech from Russia?
Well, in some ways it wasn't a huge surprise because not only Russia but the US has been ramping up not only talk but nuclear weapons development for quite some time. They've both been modernizing their nuclear weapons arsenal, so it wasn't a huge surprise. But I think it comes in context of a couple of things. Probably, definitely the election. So it's the right kind of rhetoric to be delivering in Russia right now for his needs coming up for the election. But also in response to the nuclear posture review here in the United States, where we talked about having smaller, more quote-unquote usable nuclear weapons and upgrading our arsenals. So we seem to be back in rather similar rhetoric to the Cold War, frankly, where we're talking about an escalation again and more weapons, different weapons, new, more invincible weapons, when really both countries already have 7,000 nuclear weapons.
From what the president of Russia said, you could come to the conclusion that the United States is now at a military disadvantage if Russia can hit any country anywhere on the globe undetected. Your response?
Well, this idea of being undetected rather plays into the whole question about deterrence, which is the cornerstone of the argument that's made here about why we have nuclear weapons in the first place. If you've got one that can't be detected, that rather suggests that you're going to use it. But I think that this announcement by Putin is really about the missile defense system, which has always been a little bit of a myth, frankly.
Well, Obama said that he would never put those missile defense systems in Romania, and he did. And Putin views those, the Russians view those as offensive weapons. The United States says, no, those are defensive weapons because we've got issues with Iran and we don't trust them.
Well, they're not really weapons at all.
Putin comes back and says, well, you just did a nuclear deal with Iran.
Yeah.
And so this is all starting to really unravel, is it not?
I think so. I mean, I think we're in a very dangerous times when we have rhetoric like that and really no ability for diplomacy. When you have that kind of standoff, I mean, what should be happening are talks, but it looks like the door's not open on either side right now. I mean, going back to missile defense, you're talking about a system that's supposed to shoot down, missiles in the air, and it's been tested, but only with a plan in place that you know where it's going, what the trajectory is, what time it's coming, which you would never know in a real situation. Mm-hmm. And a missile defense system has to be 100% accurate, otherwise it's useless, because if one of these gets through, we've got a major catastrophe on our hands. So really, it's not about whether the missile defense would work or not work. I think it's all to do with this constant build-up between the two countries, going back into what would really be a futile arms race.
The politics here in Washington, do you think this speech is going to move the president to try to have some kind of face-to-face with world leaders when it comes to nuclear weapons? What's the result of this going to be?
That's a really good question. I mean, who knows what would move the
isn't
president?
it time for a beer in Reykjavik?
Or maybe a vodka or two.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But, I mean, it's your guess is as good as mine what might move the president to talk to anybody. I mean, you know, he tweets quite a lot. You mentioned at the top of the show that he hasn't yet on this. But that actually does worry allies in the West. And, you know, the instability of those tweets and the kind of bellicose rhetoric and the enticing North Korea and Russia, you know, that's very dangerous, I think.
Linda Guntner, good to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much.